From a young boy raised in the Bronx to one of the greatest military leaders of our day, Colin Powell is an American success story. The History Makers, the nation's largest African-American video oral history archive, is proud to present An Evening with Colin Powell. And now to our host, renowned journalist, Juan Williams.
The art of autobiography is at the heart of the History Makers Project. Tonight, we will all have the pleasure to hear from a man whose autobiography has sold more than 2 million copies. The story of Colin Powell. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming General Colin Powell. Please have a seat. Good evening. General Powell, thank you so much for being here this evening. You honor us with your presence.
Thank you very much, Juan, and I'd like to express my thanks to the History Makers and to Juliana for bringing us all together this evening on this important occasion.
Now, I don't want to divulge anything too secret, but I hear you just had a birthday. Happy birthday.
Yes. Thank you very much. I'm one short of 70 now.
One short?
Yeah.
Well, don't think of it that way. To me, you're looking good.
I'm looking forward to 70.
Why?
Because I'll still be here.
You know, I remember when I first met you, you were President Reagan's national security advisor. And what had caught my attention was a picture of President Reagan, Soviet leader Gorbachev, having a meeting up in New York City. And there were you, an African-American at a table with these world leaders.
I remember vividly, it was at Governor's Island in New York Harbor, and it was just a few weeks before President Reagan was to leave office and Gorbachev came to see him, and they had done so much together to create conditions that were bringing the Cold War to an end. And I had worked very closely, not only with President Reagan, but with President Gorbachev, so to be there at that magic moment when Gorbachev was still trying to control something that couldn't be controlled, still trying to preserve something that couldn't be preserved, the Soviet Union. And so it was a privilege to be at that meeting, and a privilege to have been with President Reagan for the 2 years that I was.
The other thing that so impressed me about you was that you're a man who's able to speak Yiddish, Jamaican accent,
Amen.
Southern accent, British accent, Jamaican. I mean, it doesn't stop. You can do it all.
Well, it's a product of the environment in which I grew up in the South Bronx section of New York City, where everybody was a minority of one kind or another. Eastern European, Jewish, Puerto Rican, American blacks from the South, Jamaicans, and all kinds of other West Indians. And so I picked up a little of each of that.
Now you're on the speaker's circuit, you're participating in new business adventures. Can you tell us a little bit about what it's like to be Colin Powell, private citizen?
Well, it's very refreshing. It's the second time I've retired. And it's really nice to get back to being normal and not to be surrounded by people, to be able to drive yourself. The only real disadvantage is that instead of my 757, I now have the Delta Shuttle. I always have enjoyed going into retirement. In this case, I'm back in the speaking circuit, but I'm also involved in a number of business interests and some nonprofit work.
You know, one of the things that we've had in common since we've known each other is a great love of African-American history. And I wonder if you would share with us a little bit about African-American military history. And here I'm thinking of names like Henry O. Flipper, I'm thinking of the 10th Cavalry, I'm thinking of the Buffalo Soldiers. Buffalo Soldiers, of course, you've been involved so much with that monument out at Fort Leavenworth. But when you hear these names, how do they fit into the Colin Powell story?
Black military history is a rich history, and it's not that well known. It goes back 300 years. Blacks were always brought into military service when there was a need for additional bodies and blood. But when the conflict was over, then blacks were sent back into servitude. And it was the case in the Revolutionary War, where Washington had a number of blacks serving under him. It was the case in the War of 1812, when black men were promised their freedom and property if they fought for their country. They didn't receive that, but nevertheless, they fought. And every war we've ever been in, blacks stepped forward because it was the one place they could demonstrate equality. They weren't slaves, they weren't being oppressed. They may be in segregated units, and they may not have gotten the same pay or rations or equipment as white soldiers, but nevertheless, they were able to show that they were as brave and courageous as any other group of Americans.